The girl's bloody footprints led straight to Caleb Hart's fence line, each marked darker than the last across the sun-cracked Kansas dirt. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, barefoot and half dead, her dress torn to rags, her small hands gripping the lowest rail like it was the edge of the world. When she looked up at him with eyes that had seen things no child should ever witness, she whispered 6 words that would shatter the careful silence he'd built around his broken life. "Please, mister, just one night." What Caleb didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the man hunting this child wore a judge's robe and controlled every lawman, every courthouse, every whispered word in 3 counties. And the truth she carried, buried in her dead mother's final instructions, would either save them both or destroy everything Caleb had left. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lily's story travels. And if you believe some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost, hit that like button and stay with us until the very end. The summer of 1882 burned across Kansas like a fever that wouldn't break. The land stretched flat and merciless under a sky bleached white by heat, the kind of heat that made men mean and animals scarce. Caleb Hart stood on his porch in the early morning, coffee cup in hand, watching the dust devils spin themselves to death in the distance. The ranch looked smaller every year, 40 acres of stubbornness surrounded by emptiness, a house that echoed with ghosts, and a barn that held more memories than livestock. He was 34 years old and felt 60. The war had taken his youth, fever had taken his wife and infant son 3 winters back. What remained was routine. Wake before dawn, check the fence line, feed the horses, mend what broke, and speak to no one unless absolutely necessary. The nearest town, Ashford, sat 7 miles east, close enough to buy supplies, far enough to avoid conversation. Caleb preferred it that way. He drained the last of his coffee, bitter and strong, and set the cup on the rail. The sun was climbing now, turning the horizon into a shimmering mirage. He needed to ride the north fence before the heat became unbearable. Cattle had been pushing through somewhere along the wire, and he'd been putting off the repair for 2 days. No more excuses. Caleb saddled his mare, a gray named Ash, and rode out across land that had once meant something. His father had built this ranch with his own hands, raised Caleb and his brother here, taught them that a man's word and a day's work were the only currency that mattered. Both his father and brother were gone now, one to age, one to a bullet that came out of the dark during a cattle dispute no one remembered anymore. Caleb was the last Hart standing, and some days he wondered why he bothered. The fence line came into view, 3 strands of rusted wire strung between weathered posts. He spotted the break immediately, 2 posts leaning, wire sagging to the ground. Probably a deer or a desperate steer. He dismounted, pulled his tools from the saddlebag, and got to work. That's when he saw the footprints. They were small. Too small. Barefoot impressions in the dust, uneven and wandering, heading east along the fence. Caleb straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle on his saddle. Kids didn't wander out here. There was nothing for miles except scrub grass and heat. He followed the prints with his eyes, and his gut tightened. Blood. Not much, but enough. Dark drops in the dirt, scattered and inconsistent. He left the fence and followed the trail on foot, leading Ash by the reins. The prints led along the wire for maybe 100 yards before they stopped at a place where the fence met a corner post. And there, collapsed against the wood like a rag doll someone had thrown away, was a little girl. Caleb's breath caught. She was tiny, her skin sunburned and filthy, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat. Her dress, if you could call it that, was barely more than rags, torn at the shoulder and hem, stained with dirt and something darker. Her feet were bleeding, the soles torn from walking God knew how far across open country. She wasn't moving. He dropped to one knee beside her, his hands hovering, unsure. "Hey," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Hey, can you hear me?" The girl's eyes fluttered open, brown, wide, and filled with a terror so raw it hit him like a fist. She flinched back against the post, her small hands coming up to shield her face. "Easy," Caleb said, softer now. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling too fast, her lips cracked and bleeding. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then in a voice barely louder than the wind, she whispered, "Water." Caleb grabbed his canteen from the saddle and uncapped it, kneeling down again. He held it out to her slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. Here. Small sips. She lunged for it with both hands, desperate, and he had to pull it back. Slow, he said firmly. You'll make yourself sick. She nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face, and drank in tiny, shaking gulps. Caleb watched her, his mind racing. Where the hell had she come from? There were no homesteads out this way, no wagon trails, nothing but empty prairie for miles. And those injuries, those weren't from a fall or a scrape. Someone had done this to her. What's your name? He asked. She lowered the canteen, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Lily. Lily what? She hesitated, her eyes darting past him like she expected someone to appear on the horizon. More. Where are your folks, Lily? Her face crumpled and fresh tears spilled over. Mama's dead. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like she'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. He knew that tone. He'd used it himself. And your pa? Her whole body went rigid. He's not my pa. Your stepfather, then? She didn't answer. She just stared at the canteen in her hands, her small fingers white-knuckled around the metal. Caleb sat back on his heels, studying her. She couldn't be more than 8, maybe 9 years old. Too young to be out here alone. Too young to have that look in her eyes, the look of someone who'd learned the hard way that the world didn't care. How long you been walking? He asked. 2 days? Maybe 3? I don't know. Jesus. She'd crossed open country for 2 days with no water, no shoes, no supplies. She should be dead. Where were you headed? She looked up at him then, and the desperation in her face nearly broke him. Here. Caleb frowned. Here? My ranch? Mama told me to find Caleb Hart. She said if anything happened, I should come here. She said you'd help. He went very still. Your mama knew me? Lily nodded. She said you were a good man. She said you'd keep me safe. Caleb's mind scrambled for a connection, a face, a name. He didn't know any Moors. He didn't know anyone with a daughter named Lily, and yet this girl had walked through hell to reach his doorstep because her dead mother had sent her. I don't know your mama, he said carefully. I don't think we ever met. She knew you, Lily insisted. She said you lost people too. She said you'd understand. That hit him like a punch. He looked away, his jaw tight. Yeah, he'd lost people, everyone who mattered. What happened to her? He asked. Your mama. Lily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He killed her. The air seemed to freeze despite the heat. Caleb's eyes snapped back to the girl. Who? My stepfather, Judge Hale. The name landed like a stone in deep water. Caleb knew that name. Everyone in 3 counties knew that name. Judge Victor Hale presided over the territorial court in Ashford, a man of reputation and power, respected by lawmen and landowners alike. He was untouchable, and this little girl was accusing him of murder. Caleb's instinct was to pull back, to tell her she was mistaken, that grief and fear could twist a child's understanding. But the way she looked at him, steady, certain, and utterly without hope, told him she wasn't confused. She believed every word. That's a serious thing to say, Caleb said slowly. I know. Her voice didn't waver. But it's true. Did you see it happen? She shook her head. Mama got sick real sudden. One day she was fine, the next she couldn't get out of bed. He wouldn't let the doctor come. He said she was faking, but I saw the glass by her bed. It smelled wrong. Poison. She was talking about poison. Caleb's throat went dry. Lily, if that's true, you need to tell the sheriff. Her laugh was bitter, broken, and far too old for her age. The sheriff works for him. Everybody does. Not everybody. Enough. She looked down at her torn feet, her voice cracking. Mama tried. She wrote letters. She went to the church. She begged people to listen. Nobody did. And then she got sick. Lily's hands trembled. Before she died, she told me to run. She told me to come here. She said you were the only one who might believe me. Caleb didn't know what to say. He didn't want this. He didn't want a child's desperation, a dead woman's faith, or the weight of a truth too dangerous to carry. He wanted his quiet, his routine, his carefully constructed wall between himself and the world. But the girl was bleeding. She was starving. She was 8 years old, and she'd walked through fire to reach him. He exhaled long and slow and made a decision he knew he'd regret. All right, let's get you inside. He stood and reached down. Lily stared at his hand for a long moment, like she didn't quite believe it was real. Then, slowly, she placed her small, dirty fingers in his palm. Caleb pulled her to her feet. She swayed, her legs barely holding her weight. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "I can walk," she whispered. "Not on those feet, you can't." He carried her to Ash, settled her in the saddle, and swung up behind her. She leaned back against him, exhausted and silent, and Caleb turned the horse toward home. As they rode, he looked down at the top of her head, at the matted hair and the sunburned neck, and wondered what the hell he'd just brought into his life. Behind them, the horizon shimmered in the heat, and somewhere in the distance, a man in a black robe sat in a courthouse, signing papers with a steady hand, utterly confident that no one would ever question his authority. The house was cool and dim after the glare of the prairie. Caleb set Lily down gently on the old sofa in the front room, the same sofa where his wife used to sit and mend shirts in the evening light. It felt strange to see someone else there now. "Stay put," he said. "I'll get some supplies." He moved through the house with purpose, grabbing a basin, clean cloths, salve, and bandages from the cupboard. When he returned, Lily hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes tracking his every movement like a rabbit watching a hawk. Caleb knelt in front of her and set the basin on the floor. "I'm going to clean those feet. It's going to sting." She nodded, but didn't speak. He worked carefully, dabbing at the torn skin with a damp cloth, cleaning away the dried blood and dirt. She flinched once, a sharp intake of breath, but didn't pull away. The cuts were deep in places, embedded with grit and small stones. It would take days to heal, maybe longer. "You're tougher than you look," he said quietly. "Mama said pain's just proof you're still alive." Caleb's hands stilled. He looked up at her, and for a moment he saw his own wife's face, her strength, her stubbornness, her refusal to break even when the world gave her every reason. "Your mama sounds like she was smart." "She was." Lily's voice cracked. "She tried so hard." Caleb went back to bandaging her feet, wrapping them snug but not too tight. When he finished, he stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "You hungry?" She nodded. He went to the kitchen and pulled together what he had: bread, butter, some cold beef from yesterday, and a jar of preserves. He brought it back on a plate and handed it to her. Lily stared at the food like it might disappear. Then, with trembling hands, she picked up the bread and took a small, careful bite. Her eyes closed. A tear slipped down her cheek. Caleb turned away and busied himself putting things back in order. He didn't know how to handle this. He didn't know how to talk to a child who'd been through hell. He'd barely known how to talk to his own son, and the boy had only lived 6 months. "Thank you," Lily said behind him, her voice thick. He glanced back. She was crying quietly, still eating, her small shoulders shaking. "You're safe here," Caleb said, the words awkward and heavy. "For now, anyway." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "He'll come looking for me." "Maybe." "He will." She set the plate down, her expression hardening. "He doesn't let things go. And he'll use the law to do it." Caleb crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Then we'll deal with it when it happens." "You don't understand." Lily's voice rose, urgent and sharp. "He owns people. The sheriff, the mayor, half the county. He can make you disappear, and nobody will care." "I've been through worse. Not like this." She looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "He's not just mean, he's smart, and he knows how to make it all look legal." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off the doorframe and crossed to the window, looking out at the empty land. "Your mama sent you here for a reason. Maybe she thought I'd be dumb enough to fight him." "She thought you'd care." He turned back to her. "What makes you think I do?" Lily met his gaze without flinching. "Because you didn't leave me at the fence." That settled between them like dust after a storm. Undeniable, inescapable. Caleb exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. All right, you can stay tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. There's something else, Lily said quietly. What? Mama buried something. Papers. Evidence. She told me where before she died. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said if I ever got away, I had to tell someone who'd use it. Caleb's chest tightened. What kind of evidence? Proof of what he did, to her, to others. Lily's hands clenched into fists. She wrote it all down, dates, names, everything. Where is it? Buried. On his land. Of course it was. Caleb turned back to the window, his mind racing. If what she said was true, if there was real proof, then this wasn't just about protecting a runaway child. This was about pulling down a man who'd built his power on silence and fear, and it would get him killed. But then again, what did he have to lose? He looked back at Lily, sitting small and broken on his sofa, and thought about his wife, about his son, about all the people he hadn't been able to save. Maybe just this once, he could do something that mattered. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk more in the morning. Lily nodded and curled up on the sofa, pulling an old quilt over herself. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and her breathing evened out into sleep. Caleb stood there for a long time, watching her. Then he walked outside, sat on the porch steps, and stared at the horizon. Somewhere out there, a storm was coming. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Hart felt something other than emptiness. He felt rage. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Caleb heard the horses. He was in the barn, mucking out stalls and trying not to think too hard about the choices he'd made in the last 12 hours. Lily was still asleep in the house, curled beneath the quilt like she hadn't moved all night. He'd checked on her twice already, unsure why he felt the need. The sound of hooves on hard ground pulled him from his thoughts. Multiple riders, moving fast. Caleb set down the pitchfork and walked to the barn door, shading his eyes against the glare. 4 men on horseback approached from the east, kicking up dust in a straight line toward his property. Even from a distance, he recognized the lead rider by the silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff Garrett Moss. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd had maybe 3 conversations with Moss in the past 5 years, none of them pleasant. The man was a politician in a badge, more concerned with keeping his position than keeping the peace. The riders pulled up in front of the house, their horses breathing hard. Moss dismounted with the stiff movements of a man who spent more time at a desk than in a saddle. He was in his 50s, soft around the middle, with a face that wore authority like borrowed clothes. Caleb Hart, Moss said, his voice flat and official. Sheriff. Caleb didn't move from the barn door. What brings you out here? Looking for a runaway child. Girl, 8 years old, dark hair, goes by Lily Moore. Moss pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Judge Hale reported her missing 2 days ago. He's concerned for her safety. I'll bet he is, Caleb said. Moss's eyes narrowed. You seen her? Caleb considered lying, considered sending them away, buying time, figuring out a plan. But lies had a way of catching up, especially when the law was already at your door. Yeah, he said. I found her yesterday, collapsed by my fence line, half dead. Moss exchanged a glance with the other riders. Where is she now? Resting. Inside. I'll need to take her back. Like hell you will. The words came out harder than Caleb intended, but he didn't take them back. Moss's face darkened. That child is the legal ward of Judge Victor Hale, the sheriff said slowly. He has every right to her custody. I have a court order here that says so. I don't care what your paper says. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and steady. That girl's been beaten, starved, and run near to death. She's staying here until she's well enough to speak for herself. One of the other riders, a younger deputy with a patchy beard, shifted in his saddle. You can't just keep somebody's kid, mister. She's not his kid. She's his stepdaughter, and she's terrified of him. Judge Hale is a respected member of this community, Moss said, his tone hardening. He's raised concerns about the girl's mental state, says she's prone to fabrications, making up stories. Convenient, Caleb said. Bet he's got a doctor's note to back that up, too. Moss's hand moved to his belt, resting near his revolver. You're treading on dangerous ground, Hart. Then I'm right where I need to be. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. The other riders watched, hands hovering near their weapons, waiting for the word. Then, from the house, a small voice called out, "Caleb?" Everyone turned. Lily stood in the doorway, barefoot and bandaged, the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She looked even smaller in the daylight, her face pale and drawn. When she saw the men on horseback, she went rigid. Her eyes locked on Sheriff Moss, and the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, please." Moss stepped forward. "Lily, honey, it's all right. We're here to take you home." "That's not my home," her voice cracked, shrill with panic. "I won't go back. He'll kill me." "Now, Lily, you know that's not true." "He killed my mama!" Tears streamed down her face. "He poisoned her, and you know it. You all know it." The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Moss's expression didn't change. "Your mama was sick, child," he said, his voice syrupy and false. "The doctor said it was pneumonia." "The doctor lied." Lily's hands clenched into fists. "He didn't even see her. He just signed the paper." "That's enough," Moss said sharply. He looked at Caleb. "Step aside. I'm taking her back where she belongs." Caleb moved to block the porch steps. "She says she's not going. I'm inclined to believe her." "You don't have a choice." "Sure I do. I can make you go through me." The deputy with the patchy beard drew his gun halfway, then hesitated when Caleb didn't flinch. Moss raised a hand, stopping him. "You really want to do this, Hart?" the sheriff asked quietly. "You really want to stand between the law and a man like Victor Hale?" "I've stood between worse." Moss studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're a fool." "Probably." The sheriff turned and climbed back onto his horse. The other riders followed suit, their faces hard and unreadable. "I'll be back," Moss said, "with more men if I have to, and next time you won't get a choice." "Looking forward to it," Caleb said. The riders turned and spurred their horses, galloping back toward town in a cloud of dust. Caleb stood on the steps, watching until they disappeared over the rise. When he finally turned around, Lily was sitting on the porch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing. He sat down beside her, saying nothing. After a long moment, her small hand reached out and gripped his sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I brought this to you." "You didn't bring it," Caleb said quietly. "It was already here. We just didn't see it yet." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "What are we going to do?" Caleb didn't have an answer. But as he sat there beside her, staring out at the empty land, he realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from a fight. He was walking straight into one. The rest of that day passed in a silence heavy with unspoken questions. Caleb went about his work with the same methodical precision he always had, checking the horses, repairing the fence he'd abandoned yesterday, splitting wood for the stove, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he glanced toward the house, he saw Lily's small silhouette in the window, watching the horizon like she expected the world to come crashing down at any moment. Maybe she was right. By evening, the heat had broken into a dry wind that rattled the shutters and sent tumbleweed skittering across the yard. Caleb came inside to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her bandaged feet propped on a chair, her hands folded in her lap. She'd washed her face and tried to comb her hair with her fingers, but she still looked like something the prairie had chewed up and spit out. He set a pot of stew on the stove and stirred it without looking at her. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "Don't care. You'll eat anyway." She didn't argue. When he ladled the stew into bowls and set one in front of her, she picked up the spoon and ate in small, mechanical bites. Caleb sat across from her, eating his own meal in silence, the scrape of metal against tin the only sound between them. Finally, Lily set down her spoon and looked at him. "They'll come back." "I know. With more men. Probably. And you'll lose." Caleb looked up, his eyes steady. "Maybe. But I don't plan on making it easy." She studied him for a long moment, her brow furrowed. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." He didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. That she reminded him of every person he'd failed to save, that her fear and her courage made him feel something other than the hollow ache that had lived in his chest for 3 years. That maybe, just maybe, he was tired of being a man who did nothing. Your mama thought I'd help, he said finally. Seems wrong to prove her wrong. She didn't know you were alone out here, Lily said quietly. She thought you'd have people. A family, maybe. Had one once. What happened? Caleb set down his spoon, his jaw tight. Fever took my wife and son. Winter of '79. Lily's face softened. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less like two strangers forced together and more like two people who understood what it meant to lose everything. The papers my mama buried, Lily said after a while. They're real. I saw her writing in the journal every night. She hid it in a wooden box with other things, letters, receipts, things he didn't know she kept. What kind of things? Proof that he forced her to sign over her land after they got married. Proof that he threatened the doctor who wanted to treat her. Proof that he's done this before. Her voice dropped. There were other women, other children. Mama found records. Caleb's stomach turned. How many? 3 that she knew of, maybe more. And nobody stopped him? He's a judge, Lily said simply. Who's going to stop a judge? That was the question, wasn't it? In a world where the law wore a black robe and controlled the men with badges, who had the power to stand against it? Caleb pushed back from the table and walked to the window, staring out into the gathering dark. Where exactly did she bury it? On his property, there's an old oak tree near the eastern fence line, about a half-mile from the house. She buried the box under the roots on the north side, wrapped in oilcloth. That's specific? She made me memorize it. Lily's voice trembled. She said if anything happened to her, I had to remember. She said it was the only way anyone would ever believe me. Caleb turned back to face her. You understand what you're asking, right? If I go digging on Judge Hale's land and get caught, I'll be arrested. Or shot. Probably both. I know. And even if I get the box, there's no guarantee anyone will care. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, probably half the town council too. I know, Lily said again, her voice stronger now. But it's the only chance we have. Caleb looked at her, the slip of a girl who'd walked through hell and still had the nerve to hope, and felt something crack open inside him. All right, he said. I'll get the box. But not tonight. I need to scout the area first, figure out the lay of the land, and you need to rest. When? Tomorrow night, after dark. Lily nodded, and for the first time since he'd found her, something like relief flickered across her face. Caleb just hoped he wasn't making the worst mistake of his life. The next morning, Caleb rode into Ashford with a list of supplies he didn't really need and a plan he hadn't fully formed. The town sat in a shallow valley, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a wide dirt road that pretended to be a main street. The general store, the saloon, the courthouse, the church, all the markers of civilization pressed into the Kansas dust. He tied Ash to the hitching post outside the store and went inside, nodding to the clerk behind the counter. The man nodded back but didn't speak. That was fine with Caleb. He grabbed a few items, coffee, flour, a box of cartridges, and brought them to the counter. As the clerk tallied the cost, the door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was maybe 40, with graying hair pinned back in a severe bun and a dress that had seen better years. Her eyes were sharp, watchful, and when she saw Caleb, she went very still. Mr. Hart, she said quietly. Caleb looked up, surprised. Ma'am. She glanced at the clerk, then back at Caleb. Might I have a word with you? Outside? He paid for his supplies, gathered them up, and followed her out onto the boardwalk. She walked a few paces away from the door, into the shade of the overhang, and turned to face him. My name is Helen Pritchard, she said. I was a friend of Sarah Moore. Caleb's pulse quickened. Lily's mother. Helen nodded. I heard you took the girl in, that you refused to turn her over to the sheriff. Word travels fast. In a town this size, it always does. She folded her arms, her expression unreadable. I came to warn you. Judge Hale is not a man to cross lightly. So I've been told. I mean it, Mr. Hart. He's dangerous, and he has the entire law on his side. What about you? Caleb asked. If you were Sarah's friend, why didn't you help her? Helen's face tightened, pain flashing across her features. I tried. I went to the sheriff. I went to the minister. I even went to the judge himself, thinking perhaps there was some misunderstanding. She looked away, her voice bitter. He threatened my family, said if I kept spreading lies, he'd have my husband arrested for debts we didn't owe and take our children into custody for neglect. Jesus. I was a coward, Helen said flatly. I let fear silence me, and Sarah died because of it. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Condemnation felt too easy, forgiveness too cheap. Why tell me this now? He asked. Helen looked him straight in the eye. Because you're doing what I couldn't, and I think you should know what you're up against. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a list of names, people who knew what Sarah was going through, people who saw the bruises, heard the crying, witnessed the control. None of them will testify. They're all too afraid. But if you can get real proof, something undeniable, maybe they'll find their courage. Caleb took the paper and unfolded it. There were 7 names, written in neat, careful script. Thank you, he said. Helen nodded. There's one more thing. Judge Hale keeps his records locked in a safe in his study, but twice a month he rides to the territorial capital for court sessions. He'll be gone this Friday. If you're planning something, that would be your window. Caleb's mind raced. Friday was 3 days away. Why are you helping me? He asked. Helen's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. Because I have a daughter Lily's age, and every time I look at her I see Sarah's girl and wonder if I'd have the strength to save my own. Her voice broke. I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing again. She turned and walked away before Caleb could respond, disappearing into the flow of people on the street. He stood there for a long moment, the list clutched in his hand, feeling the weight of what was coming. When he returned to the ranch that afternoon, Lily was sitting on the porch steps, tossing pebbles into the dirt. She looked up as he dismounted. Did anyone give you trouble? She asked. No, but I met someone who knew your mama. Lily's face brightened. Who? Woman named Helen Pritchard. The brightness faded. Mrs. Pritchard. You know her? Mama talked about her sometimes. Said she was kind but scared. Lily's voice turned hollow. Said she'd wanted to help but couldn't. She helped today. Caleb handed her the list. She gave me this. Names of people who might stand with us if we get proof. Lily scanned the paper, her lips moving as she read. When she finished, she looked up at him with something like hope. You really think they will? I think people do what's easiest until it's not easy anymore, Caleb said. We make it hard enough to look away. Maybe they'll start looking. When are we going? Friday night. Judge will be out of town. Lily nodded, her jaw set. I'm coming with you. The hell you are. I know where the tree is. I can show you exactly where to dig. You can describe it to me. What if I'm wrong? What if you waste time digging in the wrong spot and someone comes? She stood up, her small frame rigid with determination. I'm the only one who knows for sure. You need me. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she'd been through enough, that she deserved to stay safe while he took the risk. But the truth was, she was right, and more than that, he could see in her eyes that she needed this, needed to be part of the fight instead of just a victim waiting to be saved. All right, he said finally, but you do exactly what I say, when I say it. No arguments. No arguments, she agreed. The next 3 days passed slowly. Caleb prepared as best he could, cleaned his rifle, sharpened his knife, packed supplies in case they needed to run. Lily stayed close, helping where she could, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. On Thursday afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Caleb recognized him immediately. Thomas Farrow, a rancher who lived about 10 miles south. They'd shared a drink once or twice over the years, enough to be neighborly, but not friends. Thomas pulled up in front of the house and dismounted, his face grim. Caleb. Tom. Heard you got yourself in a situation. That's one way to put it. Thomas glanced at the house, then back at Caleb. The girl still here? Yeah. Sheriff's been asking around. Told folks you're harboring a runaway, interfering with legal custody. Judge Hale's pushing to have you arrested. Let him try. Thomas shook his head. You're a damn fool, Caleb. You can't win this. Hale owns this county. Maybe, but I'm not rolling over. You got a death wish or something? Caleb met his eyes. You ever see something so wrong you couldn't walk away from it? Thomas looked uncomfortable. I've got a family to think about. So did Sarah Moore. That landed like a slap. Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment Caleb thought he might swing, but instead he just exhaled and climbed back on his horse. I didn't come here to fight, Thomas said quietly. I came to tell you to watch your back. There's talk. Some of the men who work for Hale, they're not just lawmen, they're enforcers, and they don't ask questions. Noted. Thomas hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to Caleb. Extra cartridges, just in case. Caleb caught it, surprised. Tom! Don't thank me. I'm not getting involved. Thomas turned his horse. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's right, either. He rode off without another word, leaving Caleb standing in the yard with the pouch in his hand. When he went inside, Lily was watching from the window. He seemed nice, she said. He's scared, Caleb replied, like everyone else. Are you scared? Caleb considered lying, but he'd never been good at it. Yeah, he said. I am. Lily walked over and stood beside him, looking out at the empty land. Mama used to say courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are. Caleb looked down at her, this fierce little soul who'd survived more than most adults ever would, and felt something shift. Your mama was a smart woman, he said. I know. That night, Caleb sat on the porch long after Lily had gone to sleep, the rifle across his lap, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, in a house with locked doors and drawn curtains, Judge Victor Hale slept soundly, confident in his power. But tomorrow, Caleb thought, that confidence might crack. And if he was lucky, it would shatter completely. Friday came with a sky the color of old iron and a wind that tasted like rain. Caleb spent the day double-checking his plan, going over every detail until Lily finally told him to stop pacing before he wore a hole in the floor. As the sun set, he saddled Ash and helped Lily climb up behind him. She wore an old shirt and trousers he'd found in a trunk, clothes that had belonged to his wife cut down to fit. Her feet were still bandaged, but she'd insisted on boots even though they were too big. You remember the plan? He asked. We ride to the eastern edge of Judge Hale's land, find the oak tree, dig up the box, and get out before anyone sees us. And if someone does see us, we run. Good girl. They rode in silence, cutting across open country to avoid the main road. The land rolled and dipped, the grass silvered in the twilight, the air heavy with the promise of storm. By the time they reached the edge of Hale's property, full dark had fallen. Caleb dismounted and helped Lily down, tying Ash to a low scrub tree. Stay close, he whispered. They moved on foot, keeping low, Lily leading the way. She moved with surprising confidence despite the darkness, her small hand occasionally reaching back to make sure Caleb was still behind her. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, she stopped and pointed. There. The oak stood like a sentinel against the night sky, its branches spreading wide and gnarled. Caleb pulled a small spade from his pack and knelt at the base, feeling along the roots on the north side. Here? He whispered. Lily nodded. He started to dig, the blade cutting into the hard-packed earth with soft, rhythmic scrapes. Lily crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the darkness. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Caleb's hands were cramping, sweat running down his back despite the cool air, when the spade hit something solid. Got it, he breathed. He dug faster now, clearing the dirt away until he could see the edge of a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. He pulled it free, brushing off the soil, and held it up. Lily's face broke into a smile. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice called out, "Hold it right there." Caleb's blood went cold. He shoved the box into his pack and grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her to her feet. A lantern flared to life 50 yards away, then another. 3 men on horseback emerged from the shadows, moving toward them at a walk. The lead rider held the lantern high, and in its glow, Caleb recognized the patchy-bearded deputy from the sheriff's visit. Well, well, the deputy said, grinning. Looks like we got ourselves a grave robber. Caleb's hand moved to his revolver. I wouldn't, said a second voice, cold and smooth. From the opposite direction, another rider appeared. This one wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his face shadowed but his posture radiating authority. Judge Victor Hale. Mr. Hart, Hale said, his voice like silk over steel. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Caleb stepped in front of Lily, his hand still on his gun. The girl's not property. I wasn't talking about the girl. Hale's eyes glinted in the lantern light. I was talking about the box you just dug up from my land. That's theft, Mr. Hart, and trespassing. I could have you hanged for less. Then you'll have to shoot me first. Hale smiled, cold and patient. That can be arranged. The deputies drew their guns, the hammers clicking back in the darkness. Caleb's mind raced. 3 armed men in front, Hale behind, and Lily's small hand gripping his coat. No way out. Last chance, Hale said. Give me the box and the girl, and I'll let you walk away. You have my word. Your word's worth spit. Hale's smile vanished. Then you've made your choice. The deputy raised his gun, and a shot rang out from the darkness. Not at Caleb, at the lantern. Glass shattered, oil sprayed, and the light went out in a rush of flame and smoke. The horses screamed and reared, men shouted. Another shot cracked, this one hitting the dirt near the deputy's feet. Caleb didn't wait. He grabbed Lily and ran, crashing through the brush, the shouts and gunfire echoing behind them. He didn't know who'd fired those shots, didn't know if it was help or just chaos, but he wasn't about to waste it. They reached Ash, and Caleb threw Lily into the saddle and swung up behind her, kicking the mare into a gallop. The night swallowed them whole, the thunder of hooves drowning out everything else. Behind them, the shouting faded. Ahead, the horizon stretched black and endless. And in Caleb's pack, wrapped in oilcloth and dirt, Sarah Moore's truth waited to be heard. They didn't stop riding until the ranch came into view, a dark shape against the darker sky. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline still coursing through his veins as he pulled Ash to a halt near the barn. Lily slid down first, her legs shaking, and Caleb followed, his hand instinctively checking the pack on his shoulder. The box was still there, solid and real. Inside, he said, his voice rough. Now! They stumbled into the house, and Caleb bolted the door behind them, shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. He moved through the rooms quickly, checking windows, pulling curtains, his rifle in hand. When he was satisfied they were as secure as they could be, he set the pack on the kitchen table and looked at Lily. She stood in the middle of the room, her face pale, her hands trembling. You all right? He asked. She nodded, but her eyes were wide and glassy. Who fired those shots? I don't know. They saved us. Maybe. Or maybe they just wanted the chaos. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. Either way, we're not safe here anymore. Hale knows we have the box. He'll come with everything he's got. Then we need to open it, Lily said, her voice steadier now. We need to see what's inside. Caleb pulled the box from the pack and set it on the table. It was smaller than he'd expected, maybe a foot long and half as wide, made of dark wood that had warped slightly from time in the ground. The oilcloth wrapping fell away easily, and beneath it the box was sealed with a simple latch. He flipped the latch and opened the lid. Inside, carefully arranged, were papers, dozens of them. Letters, receipts, legal documents, all stacked and organized with the kind of precision that came from desperation. On top of everything was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and worn. Lily reached out and touched the journal with trembling fingers. That's Mama's handwriting. Caleb opened it carefully. The first entry was dated 3 years earlier, just after Sarah Moore had married Victor Hale. The words were neat and measured at first, almost formal, but as he flipped through the pages, the handwriting grew more hurried, more frantic. He read aloud, his voice low. March 10th, 1880. Victor insisted I sign the deed to my family's land over to him today. He said it was a formality, that married women cannot hold property in their own name. When I hesitated, he reminded me that Lily's well-being depends on my cooperation. I signed. Lily's breath hitched. Caleb turned the page. April 2nd. The doctor came today, though I did not ask for him. Victor said I've been looking unwell. The doctor examined me and declared me in perfect health, but Victor insisted I take a tonic he prescribed. It tastes bitter, and afterward I feel dizzy and weak. I poured it out when Victor was not looking. He was poisoning her even then, Lily whispered. Caleb kept reading, the entries growing darker with each page. Accounts of threats, isolation, control. Descriptions of other women who'd married Victor Hale and died under mysterious circumstances. Names, dates, property transfers. Sarah had been meticulous, documenting everything she could find, building a case she knew no one would ever hear. Until now. Near the end of the journal, the handwriting became almost illegible, the letters shaking across the page. I'm dying. I know this now. Victor has been more careful with the doses, but I feel my strength leaving me day by day. I have hidden this journal and the documents where he will never find them. I have told Lily where to go if I do not survive. I pray she finds someone brave enough to use what I have written. I pray she finds safety. I pray she forgives me for not being strong enough to save us both. The last entry was a single line. Tell my daughter I loved her more than my own life. Caleb closed the journal, his throat tight. Lily had turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood and walked over to her, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. She turned and buried her face against his chest, crying in great heaving gasps, and he held her, this child who'd carried the weight of her mother's murder alone for so long. When the sobs finally subsided, Lily pulled back and wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. We have to show people. We have to make them see. We will, Caleb said. But we need to be smart about it. Hale controls the local law. If we go to Sheriff Moss, he'll bury this and bury us with it. Then who do we go to? Caleb thought for a moment, his mind turning over possibilities. There's a federal marshal stationed in the territorial capital, name's Clayton Reeves. I met him once, years back, during a land dispute. He struck me as honest. If anyone has the authority to stand up to Hale, it's him. How far is the capital? 2 days' ride. Maybe less if we push hard. Lily's jaw set. Then we leave tonight. We leave at first light, Caleb corrected. Riding in the dark now with Hale's men looking for us is suicide. We rest a few hours, pack what we need, and go when we can see the road. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and sank into a chair, her small frame folding in on itself. Caleb gathered blankets and made a rough bed for her on the floor near the stove, where it was warmest. She curled up without protest, the journal clutched to her chest like a talisman, and within minutes, she was asleep. Caleb sat at the table, the paper spread out in front of him, and read through the night, letters from Sarah to people who'd never responded, receipts showing payments to doctors who'd signed false death certificates, property deeds transferred under duress, a pattern so clear, so deliberate, it made his stomach turn. And woven through it all was the story of a woman who'd loved her daughter enough to fight a losing battle just to leave her the truth. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, Caleb had read every word. He packed the documents carefully back into the box, wrapped it in fresh oilcloth, and tucked it into his saddlebag. Then he woke Lily gently and handed her a cup of water and a piece of bread. Eat quick, he said. We're leaving in 10 minutes. She nodded, still half asleep, and obeyed without question. Caleb moved through the house one last time, gathering supplies, food, water, ammunition, a bedroll. He took his father's old rifle from above the mantel and checked the load. 6 rounds. He'd need more, but it would have to do. As he stepped outside to saddle Ash, he heard the sound of hooves in the distance. His blood went cold. He turned, his hand moving to his gun, and saw a single rider approaching from the west. The figure was silhouetted against the rising sun, making it impossible to see details, but the posture was relaxed, unhurried. Caleb raised his rifle. That's far enough. The rider stopped about 30 yards out and raised both hands. Easy, Hart. I'm not here to fight. The voice was familiar. Caleb squinted, then lowered the rifle slightly. Tom? Thomas Farrow urged his horse forward slowly, his hands still visible. When he got close enough, Caleb could see his face, drawn, tired, and serious. What the hell are you doing here? Caleb asked. Same thing you are, I imagine, trying not to get killed. Thomas dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. I heard about last night. Word is Hale's men found you digging on his land and someone started shooting. Hale's furious. He's got every man he owns out looking for you. You come to turn me in? Thomas gave him a flat look. If I wanted to turn you in, I'd have brought the sheriff. Then why are you here? Thomas hesitated, then pulled something from his coat, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Caleb. Because I got this last night, slipped under my door while I was asleep. Caleb unfolded the paper. It was a note, written in a hasty scrawl. If you want to stop running, meet at the Miller barn tonight. You're not alone. Who sent this? Caleb asked. I don't know, but I'm not the only one who got it. Thomas met his eyes. There are others, Caleb. People who are tired of being afraid. People who saw what happened to Sarah Moore and did nothing. We've all got blood on our hands, and some of us are finally ready to wash it off. Caleb stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. You think you're the only one who's had enough? You think Hale hasn't left a trail of broken people behind him? He's been untouchable for so long because we let him be. But maybe if we stand together, we can change that. Standing together gets people killed. So does standing alone. Caleb looked back at the house where Lily was waiting, then at the note in his hand. I'm heading to the Capitol to find Marshal Reeves. If he sees the evidence, maybe he'll act. And if he doesn't, then I'll figure something else out. Thomas nodded slowly. All right, but if you make it back, come to the Miller barn. We'll be waiting. He climbed back on his horse and turned to leave, then paused. That shooting last night? That was me. Caleb's eyes widened. You? I followed you, figured you'd need help. Thomas's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Turns out I was right. You could have been killed. Yeah, but I wasn't. He tipped his hat. Good luck, Caleb. You're going to need it. He rode off, disappearing into the morning light. Caleb stood there for a long moment, the note still in his hand, trying to process what he'd just heard. People were waking up. The silence was cracking. Maybe they had a chance after all. He went back inside and found Lily ready, the journal tucked into her shirt. Who was that? A friend, Caleb said. I think. They mounted Ash together, Caleb in the saddle and Lily behind him, her small arms wrapped around his waist. He kicked the mare into a steady trot, heading east toward the Capitol, the box of evidence secure in his saddlebag. The land stretched out before them, wide and empty, the sky a pale wash of color. For the first time in days, Caleb felt something other than dread. He felt purpose. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to water the horse and rest in the shade of a dry creek bed. Lily didn't complain, though Caleb could feel her exhaustion in the way she leaned against his back, her grip loosening and tightening as she fought to stay awake. By midday, the heat was brutal, the sun beating down like a hammer. Caleb's shirt was soaked through, and Ash was breathing hard, her coat dark with sweat. He slowed the pace, giving the mare a chance to recover and scan the horizon. That's when he saw the dust. It was maybe 2 miles back, a thin plume rising into the sky. Riders. At least 3, maybe more. Caleb, Lily said quietly. She'd seen it too. I know. He urged Ash into a canter, pushing her as hard as he dared without running her into the ground. The terrain here was rougher, dotted with low hills and scrub, and he used every bit of cover he could find, keeping to the low ground, staying out of sight. But the dust kept coming, closing the distance. They're catching up, Lily said, her voice tight with fear. Caleb's mind raced. They were still a day and a half from the Capitol, maybe more. If Hale's men caught them out here, in the open, there'd be nowhere to run, unless he made a stand. He spotted a cluster of rocks ahead, jutting out of the earth like broken teeth. It wasn't much, but it was cover. He pulled Ash to a stop and swung down, helping Lily off. Get behind those rocks, he said. Stay low and don't move. What are you doing? Buying us time. He pulled the rifle from the saddle and checked the load, then positioned himself behind the largest boulder, the rifle resting on the stone. Lily crouched behind him, her breathing fast and shallow. The riders appeared a few minutes later, 3 men on horseback, moving fast. Caleb recognized the lead rider immediately, the patchy-bearded deputy. The other 2 were men he didn't know, hard-faced and armed. They slowed when they saw Ash standing riderless near the rocks, and the deputy raised a hand, signaling the others to spread out. "Hart!" the deputy called. "We know you're there. Come out and we'll make this easy." Caleb didn't answer. He steadied the rifle, his finger resting lightly on the trigger, and waited. The deputy urged his horse forward a few steps. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The judge just wants the box. Give it up and you can walk away." "He's lying," Lily whispered. "I know." The deputy's patience ran out. He nodded to the other two men, and they started to fan out, moving to flank the rocks. Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the air, kicking up dirt 2 feet in front of the deputy's horse. The animal screamed and reared, nearly throwing its rider, and the other men pulled up short. "Next one won't miss," Caleb shouted. The deputy fought to control his horse, his face twisted with rage. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Hart. Won't be the first time." The deputy drew his gun and fired back, the bullet ricocheting off the rock near Caleb's head. Lily screamed and covered her ears. Caleb fired again, this time aiming for the man on the left. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the rider wheel his horse and retreat. For a moment, there was silence. Then the deputy shouted, "Rush him!" All 3 men spurred their horses forward, guns blazing. Caleb fired twice more, forcing them to scatter, but they kept coming. He dropped behind the rock, reloading as fast as his shaking hands could manage. "Caleb!" Lily's voice was high and terrified. He looked up and saw one of the riders circling around the far side of the rocks, cutting off their escape. Caleb swung the rifle around and fired, and the man jerked back in his saddle, blood blooming on his shoulder. He dropped his gun and slumped forward, his horse bolting. 2 left. But Caleb's rifle was empty. He grabbed his revolver, 5 rounds, and took a breath. The deputy and the remaining rider were closing in, their guns trained on the rocks. This was it. And then, from somewhere behind the riders, another shot rang out. The deputy's hat flew off his head, and he threw himself off his horse, scrambling for cover. The other rider turned, confused, and another shot cracked, this one hitting the ground near his feet. Caleb didn't waste the chance. He grabbed Lily's hand and ran for Ash, throwing her into the saddle and vaulting up behind her. He kicked the mare hard, and she bolted, racing away from the rocks as more shots echoed behind them. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Someone was watching over them, someone who wasn't afraid to pull the trigger. They rode until the rocks were far behind and the gunfire had faded into silence. When Caleb finally slowed Ash to a walk, his hands were shaking and his heart felt like it might tear through his chest. Lily was crying quietly, her face pressed against the mare's neck. "It's all right," Caleb said, though his voice was rough. "We're all right. They almost killed us, but they didn't." She looked back at him, her face streaked with tears. "Who keeps saving us?" "I don't know," Caleb said, "but I'm starting to think we're not as alone as we thought." They rode on through the afternoon, the land opening up into rolling plains dotted with wildflowers and tall grass. The capital was still more than a day away, but Caleb pushed forward, refusing to stop for more than a few minutes at a time. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they crested a low rise and saw a small settlement in the distance. It wasn't much, a few buildings clustered around a crossroads, maybe a dozen structures in total, but it had a livery stable and what looked like a general store. "We'll stop there for the night," Caleb said. "Get some rest and supplies before the final push." Lily nodded, too tired to argue. They rode into the settlement as the last light faded from the sky. A few people glanced at them with mild curiosity, but no one challenged them. Caleb paid for a stall for Ash and a room above the store, a cramped space with 2 narrow beds and a window that looked out on the street. He set the saddlebag with the box in the corner and collapsed onto one of the beds, every muscle in his body aching. Lily sat on the other bed, staring at the floor. "You should eat something," Caleb said. "I'm not hungry." "Lily," she looked up at him, her eyes red and exhausted. "Do you think Marshal Reeves will believe us?" "I don't know, but we have to try." "And if he doesn't?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He sat up, his elbows on his knees, and met her gaze. "Then we find another way. We keep fighting until someone listens." "What if no one ever does?" "Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let him win." Lily's face crumpled and fresh tears spilled over. I just want it to be over. I just want to stop running. Caleb stood and crossed to her bed, sitting down beside her. He didn't know how to comfort a child. He didn't know the right words or the right gestures, but he put an arm around her shoulders and let her cry, and maybe that was enough. When she finally fell asleep, curled up on the bed with her mother's journal clutched to her chest, Caleb stood guard by the window, watching the dark street below. Somewhere out there, Judge Victor Hale was planning his next move. Somewhere, men with guns and badges were searching, and somewhere, in the shadows, an unknown ally was watching. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He stood at the window, the revolver in his hand, waiting for the dawn. When the first light broke over the horizon, he woke Lily gently and helped her to her feet. "One more day," he said. "Just one more day, and we'll be there." She nodded, her face pale but determined. They left the settlement before the streets had fully woken, riding east toward the capital with the box of evidence secure and the weight of everything they carried pressing down like a storm about to break. The territorial capital rose from the prairie like a promise that hadn't quite been kept. Buildings of brick and wood stretched along wide streets that still turned to mud when it rained, and the smell of coal smoke and horses hung thick in the air. It was bigger than Ashford, louder, crowded with wagons and people who moved with the kind of purpose that came from believing the world owed them something. Caleb and Lily rode in slowly, drawing a few glances but no challenges. They were just two more dusty travelers in a town that saw dozens every day. Caleb kept his hand near his revolver anyway, his eyes scanning faces, looking for anyone who might recognize them. "Where's the marshal's office?" Lily asked quietly. "Near the courthouse, if I remember right." Caleb guided Ash down the main street, past the general store and the bank and a saloon that was already doing business despite the early hour. At the end of the block, he saw it, a two-story brick building with a sign that read, United States Marshal, Territorial District. He dismounted and helped Lily down, tying Ash to the hitching post. The saddlebag with the box felt heavier than it should, like the weight of what they were about to do had somehow become physical. "Stay close," he said. They climbed the steps and pushed through the door. Inside, the office was sparse and functional. A desk, a few chairs, a filing cabinet, and a map of the territory pinned to the wall. Behind the desk sat a man in his 40s with graying hair and a face that looked like it had seen more than its share of trouble. He glanced up when they entered, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Help you?" he asked. "Looking for Marshal Clayton Reeves," Caleb said. "You found him." Reeves leaned back in his chair, his hands folded across his stomach. "What's this about?" Caleb set the saddlebag on the desk. "Murder, fraud, abuse of power. Abuse of, take your pick." Reeves's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation. Who are we talking about?" "Judge Victor Hale." The name landed like a stone in still water. Reeves went very still, his gaze moving from Caleb to Lily and back again. "You want to accuse a sitting territorial judge of murder?" "I don't want to," Caleb said. "I have to, because it's true." Reeves studied him for a long moment, then gestured to the chairs. "Sit, and start from the beginning." Caleb and Lily sat, and for the next 20 minutes, Caleb told the story. He told it plainly, without embellishment, laying out the facts the way a man might lay bricks, one after another, building something that could stand on its own. He told Reeves about finding Lily at the fence, about the journal, about the box buried under the oak tree. He told him about the sheriff's refusal to help, about the deputies and the chase, about the shots in the dark that had saved their lives. When he finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Reeves's face was unreadable. "That's quite a story." "It's not a story," Lily said, her voice small but firm. "It's what happened." Reeves looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "I believe you believe that, young lady, but belief and proof are two different things." Caleb opened the saddlebag and pulled out the box, setting it on the desk. "Then read the proof." Reeves opened the box slowly, his eyes scanning the contents. He picked up the journal first, flipping through the pages, his jaw tightening with each entry. Then he moved to the letters, the receipts, the property deeds. He read in silence, his expression growing darker with every document. Finally, he set the last paper down and looked up at Caleb. "Where did you get this?" "Like I said, buried on Hale's land. The girl's mother hid it before she died." "And you dug it up without permission." "I trespassed," Caleb said flatly. "Arrest me if you want, but read what's in that box first." Reeves's mouth twitched, something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "You've got a hell of a lot of nerve, Hart." "So I've been told." The marshal leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the armrest. "Let's say everything in here is true. Let's say Hale did all of this. You understand what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to go after one of the most powerful men in the territory, a man who's been a judge for 15 years, a man who has connections in every town, every court, every law office, from here to the state line." "I'm asking you to do your job," Caleb said. Reeves's eyes flashed, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "I've heard rumors about Hale over the years. Whispers. Nothing concrete. People don't talk when they're afraid, and Hale's made damn sure people stay afraid." "Then make them stop being afraid," Lily said. Reeves turned to look at her. "How?" "By showing them he can be stopped." The marshal studied her for a long moment, the slip of a girl who'd walked through fire and refused to break, and something in his face shifted. "All right," he said, "I'll look into it. But I'm going to need more than this journal and some old letters. I'm going to need witnesses, people who'll stand up in court and testify to what they saw." "We have names," Caleb said. He pulled the list Helen Pritchard had given him from his pocket and handed it over. People who knew what was happening. People who stayed silent because they were scared. Reeves scanned the list, his brow furrowing. "I know some of these names. Good people mostly, but scared people don't make reliable witnesses." "Then make them feel safe enough to talk." "That's easier said than done." "Nothing about this is easy," Caleb said. "But it's right. And last I checked, that still matters." Reeves looked at him for a long moment, then folded the list and tucked it into his coat. "I'll start making inquiries, quietly. But you need to understand something. This is going to take time, weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, Hale's going to be looking for you. If he finds you before I can build a case, you're both dead." "So what do we do?" Lily asked. "You stay out of sight," Reeves said. "I've got a safe house about 10 miles outside of town. Small place, owned by a friend of mine. No one knows about it except me. You can wait there while I work." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not hiding." "You're not being brave either. You're being smart." Reeves's voice was firm. "Hale's got men everywhere. If he catches you out in the open, there won't be a trial. There won't be justice. There'll just be 2 more bodies buried in unmarked graves." "He's right," Lily said quietly. "Mama would want us to be smart." Caleb looked at her, then back at Reeves. Every instinct in him wanted to fight, to stand and face whatever came. But he'd learned the hard way that courage without strategy was just another word for suicide. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go to the safe house, but you keep us informed. Every step. I'm not sitting in the dark while you handle this alone." "Fair enough," Reeves said. He pulled a piece of paper from his desk and sketched a quick map. "Follow this road north out of town. About 10 miles, you'll see a turnoff marked by a dead cottonwood tree. Follow that trail west for another mile. The house is at the end. White clapboard, red door. My friend's name is Dutch Keller. Tell him I sent you." Caleb took the map and folded it carefully. "How long before you know something?" "Give me a week, maybe less if I get lucky." Oh, Reeves extended his hand. "And Hart? Thank you for bringing this to me. A lot of men wouldn't have had the guts." Caleb shook his hand. "A lot of men didn't find a dying girl at their fence." They left the marshal's office and climbed back onto Ash, the morning sun already climbing toward its zenith. The capital bustled around them, indifferent to the storm that was about to break. As they rode north out of town, Lily said, "Do you trust him?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted, "but we don't have a lot of choices." "Mama trusted people who let her down." "I know, but Reeves is different. He's federal. He doesn't answer to Hale." "Everyone answers to someone." Caleb glanced back at her, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. "You're right, but sometimes you have to take the risk anyway." They found the turnoff exactly where Reeves had said, the dead cottonwood standing like a skeletal sentinel. The trail west was narrow and overgrown, barely more than a pair of ruts through the grass. After a mile of rough riding, the house came into view. It was small and weathered, the white paint peeling in places, but it looked solid. A thin stream ran behind it, and a small barn sat off to one side. Smoke curled from the chimney, which meant someone was home. Caleb dismounted and helped Lily down, then approached the house cautiously. Before he could knock, the door swung open, and a man stepped out onto the porch. Dutch Keller was in his 60s, lean and wiry, with a face like tanned leather and eyes that missed nothing. He carried a shotgun in the crook of his arm, not quite pointed at them, but not exactly friendly either. "State your business," he said. "Marshal Reeves sent us," Caleb said. "Said you could give us a place to stay for a while." Dutch's eyes narrowed. "He send a message?" "No, just a map." "Then how do I know you're telling the truth?" Caleb met his gaze steadily. "Because if I wasn't, I'd have shot you already instead of standing here talking." Dutch stared at him for a long moment, then barked out a laugh. "Fair point." He lowered the shotgun and gestured them inside. "Come on then. You look like hell." The inside of the house was simple but clean. A single room with a stove, a table, and 2 beds pushed against the walls. Dutch poured them water from a pitcher and watched as they drank. "So what kind of trouble are you running from?" he asked. "The kind that wears a judge's robe," Caleb said. Dutch let out a low whistle. "Hale? You know him?" "Know of him. Man's got a reputation." Dutch leaned against the table, his arms crossed. "You must have done something pretty bad to get on his wrong side." "We didn't do anything," Lily said. "He did." Dutch looked at her, and his expression softened. "I believe you, kid. I've seen enough bad men in positions of power to know they don't need a reason to hurt people. They just do it because they can." "How long have you known Marshal Reeves?" Caleb asked. 10 years, give or take. He's a good man, honest, which is rare in his line of work." Dutch pulled out a chair and sat down. "If he's working your case, you're in good hands. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy." "We know." Dutch nodded. "You can stay here as long as you need. I don't get many visitors, so no one's going to come looking. But you pull your weight. I've got a garden that needs tending and firewood that needs chopping." "We can do that," Caleb said. "Good." Dutch stood and walked to the door, looking out at the empty land. "One more thing. If Hale's men do find this place, you don't try to be a hero. You run. You take the girl, and you run as far and as fast as you can, understand?" "I'm not running anymore," Caleb said. Dutch turned back to him, his face serious. "Son, there's a difference between courage and stupidity. Learn it, or you won't live long enough to see this through." Over the next 3 days, Caleb and Lily settled into a routine. They worked Dutch's land during the day, chopping wood, hauling water, tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. The work was hard but familiar, and it gave Caleb something to focus on other than the endless waiting. Lily helped where she could, though her bandaged feet still pained her. She spent most of her time sitting on the porch, reading her mother's journal over and over, memorizing every word like it was scripture. On the 4th day, Dutch rode into town for supplies and came back with news. He pulled Caleb aside while Lily was feeding the chickens. "Reeves has been asking questions," Dutch said quietly. "Talking to people on that list you gave him. Some of them are starting to crack." "How many?" "3 so far. Helen Pritchard was the first. She gave a statement about what she saw. Then a shopkeeper named Morris admitted he falsified records for Hale under threat. And a farmhand came forward with testimony about another woman who died under suspicious circumstances 5 years back." Caleb felt a surge of hope. "That's good. That's real progress." "Maybe. But it's also stirred up a hornet's nest. Hale knows something's happening. He's put pressure on the local sheriff to find you. There's a warrant out for your arrest, kidnapping, trespassing, theft. All fabricated, of course, but it gives his men legal cover to hunt you. How much time do we have?" "Not much. Reeves is pushing to convene a grand jury, but he needs more witnesses. And he needs them willing to testify in open court, not just give statements in private." Dutch's face was grim. "That's the hard part. People will talk when they think it's safe, but standing up in front of Hale and calling him a murderer? That takes a different kind of courage. Then we find people who have it, Caleb said. Where? The note Thomas Farrow got, the one about meeting at the Miller barn. If there are others who want to fight, maybe they're ready to stand up. Dutch considered this. Reeves mentioned that barn, said there's been talk of a group forming, people who've had enough. Then I need to go there, talk to them, convince them that this is their chance. You go back to Ashford. Hale's men will grab you the second you cross the county line. Then I'll have to be careful. Dutch shook his head. You're a damn fool, Hart. So I've been told. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Caleb sat on the porch with Dutch, watching the stars wheel overhead. The old man smoked a pipe, the smell of tobacco hanging in the cool air. You really think this is going to work? Dutch asked. I don't know, Caleb said honestly, but I know what happens if we don't try. The girl stays here? Yeah. She's been through enough. Dutch nodded. I'll keep her safe. You've got my word on that. Thank you. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie filling the space between them. Finally, Dutch spoke again. I knew a man once who tried to stand up to someone powerful. This was years back, different territory. He had proof, had witnesses, had everything he needed to bring the bastard down. Dutch's voice was distant, remembering. But when it came time for the trial, everyone who'd promised to testify got cold feet. The powerful man walked free, and my friend ended up with a bullet in his back. What happened to the man who killed him? Nothing. He's still out there, living his life, sleeping easy. Dutch looked at Caleb. That's the world we live in, son. The powerful protect their own, and the rest of us just try to survive. Then maybe it's time to change that, Caleb said. Dutch smiled, sad and knowing. Maybe. But change comes with a cost. You ready to pay it? Caleb thought about his wife and son, buried in the ground 3 years now. He thought about Sarah Moore, poisoned and silenced. He thought about Lily, who'd walked barefoot through hell because no one else would help her. Yeah, he said. I am. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn and prepared to leave. He saddled Ash quietly, checking his weapons and loading his saddlebag with supplies. When he turned to head out, he found Lily standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. You're leaving, she said. Just for a few days. I need to go back to Ashford, talk to some people. It's dangerous. I know. She walked over to him, her face pale in the early light. What if you don't come back? Caleb knelt down so they were eye to eye. I'm coming back, I promise. Mama made promises too. The words cut deeper than any blade. Caleb reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. Your mama fought as hard as she could, and because of that, we have a chance to finish what she started. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Don't die. I'll do my best. He stood and swung into the saddle. Dutch came out of the house, his shotgun in hand, and gave Caleb a single nod. Good luck, son. Thanks. Caleb turned Ash toward the south and rode out as the sun broke over the horizon. The land stretched wide and empty before him, the familiar shapes of the prairie both a comfort and a warning. He was riding back into the fire, but this time he wasn't running away. He was bringing the fight to them. 2 days later, Caleb arrived at the outskirts of Ashford under cover of darkness. He'd ridden carefully, avoiding the main roads, staying to the low ground where he couldn't be easily spotted. The town looked the same as always, small, quiet, a handful of lights burning in windows where people went about their ordinary lives, unaware of the storm gathering around them. He skirted the edge of town and headed west, toward the Miller barn. It stood alone on an abandoned homestead, the land around it overgrown and wild. As he approached, he saw other horses tethered outside. 4, maybe 5. People were already here. Caleb dismounted and tied Ash to a post, then approached the barn on foot. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear voices inside, low, tense, arguing. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The barn was lit by a single lantern hanging from a beam. 6 people stood in a loose circle, their faces turning toward him as he entered. He recognized some of them, Thomas Farrow, Helen Pritchard, a shopkeeper named Morris. The others were strangers, but their faces all carried the same expression, fear and determination fighting for control. Thomas stepped forward. Caleb, you made it. Barely. Helen moved closer, her eyes searching his face. Did you get the box to the marshal? I did. He's building a case, but he needs more. He needs people willing to testify. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Morris, a thin man with nervous hands, shook his head. Testifying means standing up in court, in front of Hale, in front of everyone. They'll destroy us. They'll try, Caleb said, but only if we let them. Easy for you to say, said one of the strangers, a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair. You don't have a family to protect. Neither did Sarah Moore, Caleb shot back. She just had a daughter, and she fought anyway. She documented everything Hale did because she knew someone someday would have the courage to use it. Are we really going to prove her wrong? The woman's face flushed, but she didn't look away. Thomas spoke up. Caleb's right. We've all been hiding for too long. Pretending we didn't see what was happening, pretending it wasn't our problem. But it was. It is. What about the sheriff? Morris asked. He's still in Hale's pocket. Even if we testify, what's to stop him from arresting us the second we step forward? The federal marshal, Caleb said. Reeves has jurisdiction over Hale. Once the grand jury's convened, the local law won't matter. And if the grand jury doesn't indict, then we've lost, but at least we'll have tried. Helen stepped into the center of the circle. I've already given my statement to Marshal Reeves. I told him everything I saw, everything Sarah told me before she died. If I can do it, so can the rest of you. You don't have children, Morris said bitterly. No, but I have a conscience. Helen's voice was steady, unflinching, and I'm tired of being afraid. One by one, the others began to nod. It wasn't enthusiasm. It wasn't courage. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a burden too long and finally deciding to set it down, consequences be damned. All right, Thomas said. We'll testify. All of us. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, the gray-haired woman said. Hale's not going to take this lying down. The second he realizes we're turning on him, he'll come for us. Then we stick together, Caleb said. We watch each other's backs, and we don't give him the chance to pick us off one by one. The group murmured agreement, and for the first time, Caleb felt like they might actually have a chance. Then the barn door slammed open, and Sheriff Garrett Moss stepped inside, flanked by 4 deputies with guns drawn. Nobody move, Moss said, his voice cold and flat. The group froze. Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver, but one of the deputies cocked his rifle, the sound sharp and final. Don't, Moss warned. You're already in enough trouble, Hart. What do you want, Moss? Thomas demanded. I want all of you to go home and forget this meeting ever happened. And I want Hart to come with me, peacefully. On what charge? Caleb asked. Kidnapping, trespassing, theft. Take your pick. Moss pulled a folded warrant from his coat. Judge Hale signed this himself. You're under arrest. That warrant's a lie, Helen said, her voice shaking with anger. And you know it. What I know, Moss said, is that a federal marshal's been asking questions he shouldn't be asking, stirring up trouble where there wasn't any, and that ends tonight. You can't stop the truth from coming out, Caleb said. Moss smiled, thin and humorless. Watch me. He gestured to the deputies, and they moved forward, guns raised. Thomas stepped in front of Caleb, his jaw set. You want him, you go through me. Morris moved to stand beside Thomas. Then Helen. Then the others, one by one, forming a wall between Caleb and the law. Moss's face darkened. You're all making a mistake. The only mistake, Helen said, was staying silent for so long. For a long moment, the barn was silent except for the creak of the old wood and the sound of breathing. Moss's hand rested on his gun, his eyes calculating the odds. Then, from outside, a voice called out. Sheriff Moss, step away from those people! Everyone turned. Marshal Clayton Reeves stood in the doorway, his badge catching the lantern light, a rifle in his hands and 6 federal deputies behind him. Moss's face went pale. Marshal, this is a local matter. Not anymore, Reeves said. I have testimony from 3 witnesses placing Judge Victor Hale at the center of a criminal conspiracy involving murder, fraud, and abuse of power. As of 1 hour ago, a federal grand jury has issued an indictment. Hale's under arrest, and anyone who interferes with this investigation will join him. Moss's deputies exchanged nervous glances. One of them lowered his rifle, then another. Moss stood there, his jaw working, fury and fear warring on his face. Finally, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah," Reeves said. "It is." The federal deputies moved into the barn, disarming Moss and his men and escorting them outside. Reeves walked over to Caleb, his expression unreadable. "You took a hell of a risk coming back here," the marshal said. "Had to," Caleb replied. "These people needed to know they weren't alone." Reeves looked at the group, Thomas, Helen, Morris, and the others, and nodded slowly. "They're not anymore." He turned to address everyone. "Judge Victor Hale has been taken into federal custody. His trial will begin in 2 weeks. I'll need statements from all of you, and when the time comes, I'll need you to stand up in court and tell the truth. Can you do that?" One by one, they nodded. "Good," Reeves said. "Then let's finish this." The federal courthouse in the territorial capital was built to intimidate. 3 stories of limestone and iron, it rose above the smaller buildings around it like a monument to authority. People climbed its wide stone steps every day seeking justice, or at least the illusion of it, and most left with neither. But on the morning of Victor Hale's trial, the steps were crowded with something different. Witnesses, reporters, curious townspeople who'd heard the rumors and wanted to see if a man who'd ruled like a king could actually fall. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation, the kind that comes when people sense that something fundamental is about to shift. Caleb stood near the back of the crowd, his hat pulled low, watching the flow of people. Lily was beside him, wearing a simple gray dress that Helen Pritchard had given her. Her bandaged feet had finally healed enough to wear proper shoes, and she stood straighter now, her chin up, though her hand gripped Caleb's sleeve tight enough that he could feel her trembling. "You don't have to go in there," he said quietly. "You've done enough." "I want to," she said. "I want to see his face when they say what he did." Marshal Reeves appeared at the top of the steps, scanning the crowd. When he spotted Caleb, he made his way down, his expression all business. "You ready?" Reeves asked. "As I'll ever be." "The prosecution's calling you third after Helen Pritchard and Dr. Morris. Keep your answers short and factual. Don't let Hale's attorney rattle you." He looked down at Lily. "And you'll be called last. The judge has allowed it, but he's warned me that if you can't handle the questions, he'll dismiss you from the stand." "I can handle it," Lily said, her voice steady. Reeves nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "I believe you can." He gestured toward the doors. "Come on, let's end this." The courtroom was packed to capacity, every bench filled, people standing along the walls. The air was thick with heat and the smell of too many bodies pressed too close together. At the front, behind the judge's bench, hung the territorial seal, and below it sat Judge Amos Cartwright, a man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and a reputation for being unmoved by sentiment or pressure. And at the defense table, flanked by his attorney, sat Victor Hale. He looked smaller than Caleb remembered, or maybe that was just the distance. Hale wore a dark suit, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his expression calm and controlled. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like what he'd always been, a man who knew how to wear respectability, like armor. But when his eyes swept the courtroom and landed on Lily, something cold and sharp flickered across his face. Lily didn't look away. She stared back at him, unflinching, and Caleb felt a surge of fierce pride. Judge Cartwright banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "This court is now in session. The United States of America versus Victor Nathaniel Hale. Prosecution, you may call your first witness." The federal prosecutor, a lean man named Sullivan, with the look of someone who'd spent too many years fighting losing battles, stood and straightened his coat. "The prosecution calls Mrs. Helen Pritchard." Helen walked to the stand with her head high, though her hands shook as she placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. She sat, smoothed her skirt, and looked directly at Sullivan. "Mrs. Pritchard," Sullivan began, "how long did you know Sarah Moore?" 5 years. We attended the same church. Our daughters played together." "And during those 5 years, did Mrs. Moore ever confide in you about her marriage to the defendant?" Helen's voice was clear, though pain edged every word. Yes, many times. What did she tell you? She told me her husband was cruel, that he controlled every aspect of her life, what she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. She said he'd forced her to sign over her family's land and threatened to take Lily away if she refused. Hale's attorney, a silver-haired man named Brennan, rose smoothly. Objection? Hearsay. Your Honor, Sullivan said, this testimony establishes the victim's state of mind and the pattern of control exerted by the defendant. Judge Cartwright considered for a moment. I'll allow it. Continue. Helen took a breath. Sarah came to me 3 months before she died. She was terrified. She said Victor was poisoning her, giving her something in her evening tea that made her sick. She'd started refusing to drink it, pouring it out when he wasn't looking, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he found another way. Did you report this to the authorities? Helen's face crumpled. I went to Sheriff Moss. He told me Sarah was prone to hysteria, that women often imagine things when they were unhappy in their marriages. He said if I kept spreading rumors, I'd be charged with slander. And after Mrs. Moore's death, I blame myself. I still do. I should have done more. I should have fought harder. Sullivan let that sit for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. No further questions. Brennan stood, his expression sympathetic in a way that felt calculated. Mrs. Pritchard, you said Mrs. Moore claimed she was being poisoned. Did you ever see the defendant administer poison? No. Did you ever see any evidence of poison? A bottle, a vial, anything? No, but just yes or no, please. Helen's jaw tightened. No. And when you went to Sheriff Moss with these accusations, did you have any proof? Sarah's word was proof enough. That's not what I asked. Did you have physical evidence? No. Brennan nodded as if she'd just confirmed something important. So what we have is the word of a woman who, by your own admission, was unhappy in her marriage, speaking to a friend who wanted to believe her. Is it possible, Mrs. Pritchard, that Sarah Moore was simply unhappy and looking for someone to blame? No, Helen said, her voice rising. She was telling the truth. Or she was a troubled woman who imagined persecution where there was none. Objection! Sullivan was on his feet. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Cartwright said. Mr. Brennan, ask questions. Don't make speeches. Brennan inclined his head. No further questions. Helen stepped down, her face pale but composed. As she passed Caleb, she whispered, I did what I could. You did good, he said. Dr. Alan Morris was called next, a nervous man who'd run the general store in Ashford for 20 years. He testified about falsifying property records under Hale's orders, about seeing bruises on Sarah Moore's arms, about the fear that kept him silent. Brennan tore into him on cross-examination, painting him as a coward trying to save himself by pointing fingers. Morris stumbled over his answers, sweat beading on his forehead, and by the time he left the stand, the damage was done. Then it was Caleb's turn. He walked to the stand, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, and swore the oath. When he sat, he looked out at the courtroom and saw Lily watching him, her eyes wide and trusting. Sullivan approached. Mr. Hart, please tell the court how you came to be involved in this case. Caleb told the story plainly. Finding Lily at the fence, her injuries, her terror, the journal and the box buried under the oak tree. He kept his voice steady, his answers short, and didn't let Brennan's sneering interruptions throw him off. When Sullivan asked him to describe what he'd read in Sarah Moore's journal, Caleb recited passages from memory, his voice filling the silent courtroom. He talked about the poison, the threats, the systematic destruction of a woman's life at the hands of a man who wore authority like a weapon. Brennan tried to discredit him on cross-examination, painting him as a grief-stricken widower who'd projected his own loss onto a stranger's child. But Caleb didn't rise to the bait. He just repeated what he knew, what he'd seen, and let the truth speak for itself. When he stepped down, he felt exhausted, but unbowed. The prosecution called 3 more witnesses, a farmhand who'd seen Hale strike Sarah in public, a housekeeper who'd been dismissed after questioning the doctor's diagnosis, and a clerk who'd processed the fraudulent property transfer. Each one added another brick to the wall of evidence. And then, As the afternoon light slanted through the high windows, Sullivan stood and said, "The prosecution calls Lily Moore." The courtroom went silent. Every eye turned to the small girl as she walked to the stand, her head high, her steps steady. She placed her hand on the Bible, and when the clerk asked if she swore to tell the truth, her voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." She sat, her feet barely touching the floor, and looked at Sullivan with calm determination. "Lily," Sullivan said gently, "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell the court about your mother, about what happened to her." Lily took a breath. "My mama was the kindest person I ever knew. She loved me more than anything, and he killed her." She pointed at Hale, her small hand unwavering. Hale's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Tell us what you remember," Sullivan said. Lily told them everything. About the night she'd heard her mother crying, about the bruises hidden under long sleeves, about the way Hale controlled every aspect of their lives, deciding what they ate, when they slept, who they could see. She told them about the glass by her mother's bed, the strange smell, the way Sarah had grown weaker and weaker despite the doctor's assurances, and she told them about the night her mother died. "Mama called me to her room. She could barely sit up. She told me she didn't have much time. She told me about the box, about where she'd hidden it, about what I needed to do." Lily's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "She told me to find Caleb Hart. She said he was a good man, that he'd help me. And then she told me she loved me, and she made me promise I'd be strong." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "The next morning she was dead, and he told me it was pneumonia. He told everyone it was pneumonia. But I knew. I'd seen the glass, I'd smelled the poison, and I knew if I stayed, I'd be next." Sullivan let the words hang in the air, then asked quietly, "Why did you run?" "Because nobody would listen. I told the sheriff. I told the minister. I told anyone who would hear me. But they all looked at him." She pointed at Hale again. "In his nice suit with his important job, and they looked at me just a kid. And they decided I was lying, so I ran, because staying meant dying." "Thank you, Lily," Sullivan said. "No further questions." Brennan stood, and for the first time he looked uncertain. Attacking a crying child in open court was a dangerous move, but he had to try. "Miss Moore," he said, his tone carefully gentle, "you were very young when your mother died. Only 8 years old. Is it possible that in your grief you misunderstood what was happening?" "No," Lily said, "but you said yourself that you saw your mother growing weaker. Isn't it possible she was simply ill, as the doctor said?" "She was ill because he was poisoning her." "You keep saying that, but did you ever actually see Judge Hale put poison in your mother's drink?" Lily hesitated. "No, but I saw the glass. I smelled it." "And you, a child with no medical training, concluded it was poison." "Mama told me it was poison. According to your testimony, your mother was very sick at the time. Delirious, perhaps. People who are dying sometimes say things that aren't true." Lily's eyes blazed. "My mama wasn't delirious. She was dying because he killed her, and you know it. Everyone in this room knows it. You're just too scared to say it." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Cartwright banged his gavel. "Order." Brennan's face tightened. No further questions. Lily stepped down and walked back to Caleb, her small body shaking. He put an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "You did good," he whispered. "Your mama would be proud." The trial continued for 2 more days. The defense called witnesses who testified to Hale's good character, his service to the community, his dedication to the law. They brought in doctors who explained that Sarah Moore's symptoms could have been caused by any number of natural illnesses. They suggested that Lily had been coached, that the journal had been fabricated, that the entire case was built on the grief-fueled fantasies of unreliable witnesses. But the prosecution had the documents, the letters, the property deeds, the pattern of deaths that stretched back over a decade, all women who'd married Victor Hale and died within a few years, their estates transferred to his control. On the 3rd day, both sides rested, and Judge Cartwright sent the jury to deliberate. The wait was agony. Caleb and Lily sat on a bench outside the courtroom, neither of them speaking, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Helen Pritchard brought them sandwiches they couldn't eat. Thomas Farrow paced the hallway, his boots echoing off the stone. After 4 hours, the jury returned. The courtroom filled again, the same crowd, the same tension, but now it felt sharper, heavier. Judge Cartwright took his seat and the foreman of the jury stood. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Cartwright asked. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The foreman looked at Hale, then at the judge. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Voices rose in shock and triumph and disbelief. Judge Cartwright banged his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order. Caleb felt Lily's hand grip his, her fingers digging in so hard it hurt, and when he looked down at her, she was crying. Not sad tears. Tears of relief. Hale sat frozen at the defense table, his face ashen. Brennan was already on his feet, shouting about appeals, but the judge ignored him. "On the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy," Cartwright continued, "how do you find?" "Guilty on all counts, Your Honor." More chaos, more gavel banging. Hale's attorney demanded a mistrial. The prosecution asked for immediate sentencing. Finally, Cartwright restored order. He looked at Hale, and his expression was cold as iron. "Victor Nathaniel Hale, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. The evidence presented in this court revealed a pattern of cruelty, manipulation, and murder that is as calculated as it is depraved. You used your position of power to silence the innocent, to steal from the vulnerable, and to end lives without remorse." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You will be sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Sentenced to be carried out 30 days from today. May heaven have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the room. Hale was led away in chains, his face blank, his eyes seeing nothing. As he passed Lily, she stood and looked him straight in the eye. "Mama won," she said quietly. Hale didn't respond. He just kept walking, a broken man in a broken suit, and disappeared through the door. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Caleb and Lily stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by people who'd fought beside them. Helen, Thomas, Morris, and others whose names Caleb was still learning. Marshal Reeves shook his hand, his grip firm and respectful. "You did it," Reeves said. "You brought him down." "We all did," Caleb replied. Reeves looked at Lily. "What happens to her now?" Caleb glanced down at the girl, and she looked up at him with hopeful eyes. "That's up to the court," he said. "But I'd like to petition for custody, if she'll have me." Lily's face broke into the first real smile he'd ever seen from her. "I'd like that." Reeves nodded. "I'll make sure the paperwork goes through. You've earned it." The crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their lives, their faces lighter than they'd been in years. Caleb and Lily walked to where Ash was tied, and he helped her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," Caleb said. "We're going home." They rode out of the Capitol as the stars began to appear, the night settling soft and cool over the prairie. The land stretched out before them, wide and endless, no longer a place of fear but a place of possibility. The weeks that followed were quieter than Caleb had expected. He'd braced himself for retaliation, for Hale's allies to come seeking revenge, but it never came. The man's network of fear and control had collapsed the moment the verdict was read. Sheriff Moss resigned in disgrace. The doctor who'd signed the false death certificates left town in the middle of the night. The others who'd enabled Hale simply melted away, unwilling to be associated with a fallen tyrant. Caleb was granted full custody of Lily through a quiet hearing where no one objected. Helen Pritchard stood as a character witness, and Marshal Reeves submitted a letter vouching for Caleb's integrity. The judge signed the papers without hesitation, and just like that, Caleb Hart became a father. It was strange at first, learning to share his space, his routine, his silence with another person. Lily was quiet most of the time, respectful of his need for solitude, but she was also curious, asking questions about the ranch, about his past, about the future. She helped with chores without being asked, and in the evenings she'd sit on the porch and read from her mother's journal, her lips moving silently as she memorized the words. One night, about a month after the trial, Caleb found her crying on the porch steps, the journal open in her lap. He sat down beside her, saying nothing, just waiting. "I miss her," Lily said finally. "Every day, I miss her. I know. Does it ever stop hurting? Caleb thought about his wife, about his son, about the ache that had lived in his chest for 3 years. No, but it changes. It becomes part of you instead of something trying to tear you apart. How long does that take? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Lily looked at him, her eyes red but clear. Do you think Mama would be happy with how things turned out? Caleb considered the question carefully. I think your mama would be proud of you. I think she'd be glad you're safe. And I think she'd be grateful that the truth finally came out. But she's still gone. Yeah, she is. He paused, choosing his words. But she's also still here. In you. In what she taught you. In the courage she gave you to keep fighting even when everything said you should give up. Lily closed the journal and held it against her chest. Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't do much, Caleb said. You did everything. They sat together in the quiet, watching the stars wheel overhead, and for the first time since his wife had died, Caleb felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was living. The ranch began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it came back to life. Caleb repaired the fences he'd neglected, patched the barn roof, planted a small garden behind the house. Lily helped, her small hands learning the rhythms of the land, and together they built something that felt like a future. Thomas Farrow stopped by occasionally, bringing news from town. Ashford had elected a new sheriff, a younger man with no ties to Hale's network. People were talking openly now about things that had been whispered before. The town was healing, though the scars would take years to fade. Helen Pritchard visited once, bringing a basket of preserves and a new dress for Lily. The two of them sat on the porch for hours, talking about Sarah, remembering her kindness and her strength. When Helen left, she hugged Lily tight and told her she'd always have a place in her home if she needed it. Lily thanked her, but said she was happy where she was. In early autumn, Marshal Reeves rode out to the ranch with news. Victor Hale had been executed the previous week. The sentence had been carried out quietly, without ceremony, and his body had been buried in an unmarked grave outside the Capitol. I thought you'd want to know, Reeves said. Caleb nodded. How do you feel about it? Justice was served. That's all that matters. Is it? Reeves looked at him, then at Lily, who was feeding the chickens nearby. Yeah, it is, because she's alive and she's safe, and she's got a chance to be a kid again. That's more than most people get when they go up against someone like Hale. Caleb couldn't argue with that. As winter approached, the land turned brown and the air grew cold. Caleb and Lily prepared for the season, stocking firewood and preserving what they could from the garden. They worked side by side, and in the evenings, Caleb taught her how to read the stars, how to predict the weather, how to survive on the prairie. She was a quick learner, soaking up knowledge like the dry earth soaked up rain. One night, as the first snow began to fall, Lily looked up from the book she was reading and asked, "Can I call you Pa?" Caleb's throat tightened. "If you want to." "I want to." She hesitated. "Is that all right? I mean, I'll never forget my real father, or Mama, but you're the one who's here, the one who saved me." "You saved yourself," Caleb said. "I just gave you a place to land." "Still?" She smiled, small and tentative. "Can I?" "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "You can." From that night on, she called him Pa, and he called her daughter, and the words felt right in a way that defied explanation. The years passed. The ranch grew stronger. Lily grew taller, smarter, more confident. She learned to ride, to shoot, to mend fences and birth calves, and read the land the way Caleb's father had taught him. She kept her mother's journal in a wooden box under her bed, taking it out sometimes to read, but less and less as time went on. She didn't need it as much anymore. The memories were part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was, but they no longer defined her. By the time she turned 16, she was working the ranch alongside Caleb like a partner, not just a child. She had opinions, ideas, a vision for what the land could become. And Caleb listened, because she was usually right. One spring morning, as they worked together to repair a broken fence post, Lily paused and looked out at the horizon. "You ever think about what would have happened if Mama hadn't sent me to you?" she asked. Caleb hammered in a nail, then straightened. "Sometimes. I'd probably be dead. Maybe. Or maybe you'd have found another way. I don't think so. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. I think she knew exactly what she was doing. I think she knew you'd fight for me even when you didn't want to. I wanted to, Caleb said quietly. I just didn't know it yet. Lily smiled. She was smart like that. They finished the fence in silence, then walked back to the house together, their shadows long in the afternoon light. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Caleb thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the pain, the loss, the fight. And he thought about what they'd built in spite of it all. A family. Not by blood, but by choice. Not because the world had made it easy, but because they'd decided it was worth fighting for. Lily leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content, and Caleb realized that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the man who lived alone in the shadows of his grief. He'd become a father, a protector, a man who'd learned that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to let someone in. The sky faded from gold to purple to deep blue, and the first stars appeared, bright and steady. "Pa?" Lily said softly. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything." Caleb put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "You're welcome, kiddo." They sat together until the night settled fully around them, and the prairie whispered its ancient song of survival and hope and the stubborn refusal to be broken. And in the house behind them, on a shelf in Lily's room, Sarah Moore's journal waited, a testament to a woman's courage, a mother's love, and the truth that even in the darkest places, someone would eventually be brave enough to bring it into the light. The ranch endured, the land healed, and the family built on truth and choice and hard-won love grew strong enough to outlast fear, power, and fire. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not revenge, not vindication, just the quiet daily work of caring for each other and building something worth keeping. And that, Caleb thought, as the stars wheeled overhead, was more than enough.